Some mornings feel as if the world forgot to wake up, and today, Rick found himself in just such a morning, where shadows hummed softly and memories lingered like whispers in the air. You are truly cared for, and we love having you here, letting your mind rest and wander with gentle curiosity. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, settle in, and let's drift together into the quiet unfolding of tonight's tale. The morning arrived quietly, though not in the way mornings usually do. There was a slight hesitation in the air, a gentle pause that made the light feel uncertain as it slipped through the blinds. Rick woke somewhere between dream and memory, as if the world itself had forgotten the hour. He lay still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of things that were alive but unseen, the quiet murmur of the house, the faint whisper of something moving beyond the walls, the almost imperceptible hum of machines left to dream in the corner of the garage. He blinked slowly and realized he was not exactly sure where here was. The familiar clutter of tools and blinking gadgets stretched around him like a muted chorus, each one humming its own soft tune. The air smelled faintly of ozone and old paper, a combination that made him think of forgotten afternoons, of moments that had passed without notice, and of things almost remembered. There was a curious emptiness, yet it felt welcoming in a strange way, like the quiet before a lullaby. Rick rolled onto his side and stared at a small beam of light dancing along the wall. It wavered and shimmered like it had its own heartbeat, and in that simple, trembling illumination, he thought he saw echoes of what might have been, shapes of faces, fragments of laughter, and whispers of conversations that existed somewhere behind memory. It was not urgent. It did not demand anything. It simply asked to be noticed. And so he noticed. He thought, perhaps for the first time that morning, of Morty. The memory of his grandson's small, uneven breathing, the way his fingers curled gently over the edge of the bed, how he sometimes muttered nonsense words in sleep that were strangely melodic. The thought brought a warmth to Rick's chest that was unfamiliar, not sharp, not ironic, just soft and quiet. A small tug that reminded him that he had been a part of someone else's story, and that someone else had been part of his. And for a long moment Rick simply lay there, letting the hum of the garage and the weight of the morning wrap around him like a blanket. He did not move. He did not speak. The light shifted slowly, tracing patterns across the floor, tracing the subtle contours of tools and old notebooks, and he let it. Sometimes, he thought, the world speaks not in shouts but in the gentle bending of light and the whisper of things left unattended. He remembered a morning long ago when he was younger and the sky had been a different shade of blue, pale, unsure, almost hesitant. He had walked down quiet streets, noticing the sway of branches, the soft shiver of leaves in the wind, the distant laughter of children. He had thought then, as he thought now, that some moments are meant to be absorbed slowly, almost too slowly to register, because they contain something essential that cannot be hurried. And he realized with a sudden clarity that mornings like this, the kind that almost weren't, the kind that linger at the edges of thought, were rare gifts. Rick exhaled, soft and almost inaudible. He imagined Morty stirring in another room, the light brushing his hair, the quiet rhythm of his breathing forming its own song. He felt the tug again, that faint warmth of connection that neither needed words nor demanded presence, just existed in the space between them. There was love here, he thought. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft pulse beneath the surface. And in that pulse, he found something worth carrying through the day, however strange or uncertain it might be. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Take a slow breath, feel the quiet of the room around you, and let the soft glow of memory and light settle over you. We truly love and care for you, and tonight we want to share this story gently with you. Now grab your coffee if you like, and let's get started. The garage hummed, the shadows bent gently along the walls, and Rick let himself be still. Somewhere in the quiet, the world seemed to lean closer, listening, waiting, soft and attentive, as if it knew the story about to unfold was not about action, but about presence, care, and the quiet wonder of being. Morty awoke in the quiet hours just before sunrise, when the world felt suspended between night and day. The edges of his room were still blurred with shadows, and the gentle hum of the house seemed to breathe alongside him. He stretched slowly, his small hands brushing against the worn sheets, and for a moment he paused, listening. The air was soft, carrying a faint scent of morning dew and something faintly metallic from the garage below. Even as a child, Morty noticed the small, strange details others overlooked. A single leaf clinging stubbornly to a branch outside his window. The rhythm of his cat's tail swishing silently against the floor. The way the sunlight, still pale and shy, tipped over the edges of furniture and made ordinary objects seem magical. He didn't yet understand why he was drawn to these things, but he felt an innate wonder, a gentle curiosity that seemed to hum quietly beneath his skin. He padded softly to the window, eyes half closed, and watched as the first ribbons of light began to stretch across the sky. Clouds moved lazily, drifting like distant memories, and in that quiet Morty felt as if the world were whispering secrets meant only for him. He imagined tiny stories within each cloud, and each story carried a kind of soft magic he could not name. Even without words, he understood them in a way that felt intimate and alive. Morty's earliest discoveries were not loud or sudden. They were small acts of empathy, almost imperceptible to anyone else. He would notice when a sibling's mood was off, when the faintest frown shadowed a parent's eyes, or when a pet needed quiet companionship. He would offer what little he could, an extra blanket, a soft word, a hand held for a fleeting moment. Nothing heroic by conventional measure, yet each gesture built a tiny bridge between him and the world. Today, for example, he found a small injured bird by the window ledge. Its wing was bent in a way that made Morty's heart ache quietly. He picked it up gently, cupping it in both hands, and felt its tiny heartbeat, fast and irregular, like the echo of some fragile rhythm he wanted to protect. He whispered soft encouragements, even though he knew the bird could not understand him fully. Morty didn't yet know the word kindness, but he understood the feeling behind it. It was a quiet act of love that required no applause, only care. From the garage below, faint hums drifted upward. Rick's early tinkering had begun, though the boy did not yet grasp its meaning or consequence. To Morty, the sounds were like a lullaby for the restless. Tools moving, gears clicking, the soft thrum of an idea forming. He felt comforted by it, as if the presence of his grandfather, even in silence, affirmed the safety of this morning. There was a rhythm to it, a gentle reassurance that the world could be both strange and secure at the same time. Morty returned to his small bed and rested on his side, watching the sunlight grow stronger, yet still forgiving in its touch. He imagined the stories he might tell someday, stories born from the small wonders he had observed, a leaf that danced like a spirit, a cat that hid little messages in its purrs, a bird that needed gentle hands to feel the world. All of it felt like a secret garden, a universe tucked quietly within the ordinary, where care and curiosity were the only tools needed to navigate. In that moment, Morty did not know that these early habits, the soft noticing, the quiet empathy, the attentive presence, would shape his understanding of Rick in ways no adventure could teach. He would learn to listen to the world, to read its subtle cues, to find meaning in silence, and to carry tenderness as a kind of quiet strength. And even now he felt a soft stirring of it, a gentle power that did not shout or insist, but simply existed, waiting to bloom in small, patient ways. The sky outside shifted, clouds moving like whispered memories. Morty closed his eyes briefly, imagining the gentle hum of the garage and the quiet warmth of the house around him. He let himself sink into the calm, letting each small wonder settle softly within him, as if storing them for nights when the world might feel too vast or too lonely. And so the morning unfolded, quietly, gently, like a soft lullaby of beginnings. Morty breathed slowly, deeply, carrying with him the small, luminous sense that the world, in all its strangeness, could be watched, understood, and cherished. The day arrived slowly, like a soft sigh across the house, carrying with it a quiet sense of weight that neither Rick nor Morty fully understood. The air was tinged with a strange stillness, the kind that settles in corners and lingers even when sunlight pours in. Morty, still small and tender, noticed it immediately. There were subtle changes in the rhythm of the house, the way a chair scraped more quietly across the floor, the muted hush of voices from the kitchen, and the delicate pause in Rick's humming from the garage below. Rick's own mood moved in faint waves. He did not speak much this morning, and his usual restless energy was tempered by something unspoken, a shadow of regret or fatigue that pressed softly on the edges of the world. Morty watched him from a distance, sensing the weight but not its origin. He had learned to pay attention to these things, to notice when the air itself seemed to carry unspoken stories. The boy's empathy, quiet and gentle, allowed him to absorb the emotion without needing explanation. The lesson came first in small gestures. A misplaced cup of tea, a letter left unread, a sigh that lingered too long in the hallway. These simple traces whispered to Morty that even the people he loved carried burdens invisible to most eyes. He did not yet understand the full depth of sadness, but he felt its soft imprint, like a shadow brushing against his own heart. And in that feeling, he discovered his first instinct to reach out, to offer small comfort even when words failed. Rick, for his part, noticed Morty noticing. There was a quiet moment when their eyes met across the room, a flicker of understanding, and for an instant the world felt suspended. Neither of them spoke. Rick's hands rested lightly on the edge of a workbench, still humming faintly with energy, while Morty shifted closer to the window, watching the way sunlight spilled across the floor, casting gentle, long shadows. That moment, unremarkable in action but rich in quiet connection, became a kind of anchor in their shared memory. The lesson deepened with a small, unexpected event. A neighbor's dog wandered into their yard, frightened and trembling, carrying the residue of some unseen sorrow. Morty instinctively knelt down, his hands outstretched, speaking softly to the creature in a voice he barely understood himself. Rick paused, observing, and something in the soft, tender motion stirred a reflection in him, a reminder that even the smallest act of care could ripple outward, bringing relief where none was expected. The dog relaxed gradually, as if sensing the quiet empathy that radiated from the boy. There was no triumph, no applause, only the recognition that sadness existed, that it could touch anyone, and that gentle attentiveness could offer solace. Rick finally spoke, his voice low and measured, breaking the silence in a way that felt deliberate, like the first note of a soft, familiar song. He did not offer advice or explanation, only acknowledgement. Some mornings are heavier than others. That's all. Morty nodded, understanding more in that simple statement than any long lecture could convey. Later, as shadows lengthened and the day began to settle into evening, the house seemed quieter still. Morty lingered near the window, watching the clouds drift lazily across the sky, carrying the golden light of sunset. He thought about the small acts of noticing, of reaching out, of offering comfort without expectation. Each one was a stitch in a tapestry he could not yet name, a fabric that would grow and expand as he grew, connecting him to Rick and the world in ways both tender and profound. Rick moved slowly to join him, not in explanation, not in command, but in shared presence. They stood side by side, the silence between them full and weighty, not empty. In that quiet, Morty began to understand something essential, that sadness did not always require fixing, that grief and worry could exist alongside laughter and light, and that being present, truly present, was sometimes the most meaningful gift of all. As night approached, a soft hush fell over the house. Morty felt the gentle echo of lessons learned that day, the subtle imprint of compassion and understanding pressing softly against his chest. He realized in the quiet of his heart that these early experiences of noticing sadness would guide him for years to come, shaping his awareness, his empathy, and his quiet courage in ways he could not yet measure. And so the day ended gently, a tender shadow lingering over the corners of the home, a whisper of care weaving through the air, leaving both Rick and Morty quietly aware of each other, quietly present, and quietly growing. The garage smelled of metal and possibility. Rick had always insisted it was just a place for tinkering, but to Morty, it felt alive in a way that could not be explained. The hum of machines, the faint vibration of tools resting in their racks, and the soft whirring of gadgets waiting patiently for attention created a chorus of quiet whispers. It was as if the walls themselves held stories, waiting for someone to lean close enough to hear them. Morty stepped inside slowly, toes brushing the cold concrete floor. The morning light spilled in through the high windows, scattering across workbenches and illuminating the dust motes dancing lazily in the air. He noticed the smallest things first, the bend of a wire, the gentle tilt of a screwdriver, the faint trail of Rick's coffee mug left behind on a shelf. Each detail seemed significant, though he couldn't yet articulate why. The garage, in its cluttered stillness, felt like a secret world, one where quiet observation mattered more than loud deeds. Rick moved among the tools with a softness that surprised Morty. His hands, usually precise and deliberate, hovered over objects with a reverence that suggested the machines themselves were friends rather than mere instruments. He did not speak at first, letting the quiet of the space guide him. Morty watched, sensing the subtle rhythm between the man and his creations. The garage hummed gently, a lullaby of gears and cogs that seemed to carry its own memory. For a while, neither spoke. They existed together in a shared attentiveness, Rick adjusting a small device here, Morty tracing the edges of a notebook there. Morty had learned to listen to this quiet language, the language of presence, of small actions that communicated more than words ever could. Rick, in turn, noticed the boy noticing. There was a soft smile in his eyes, fleeting and almost hidden, as if he recognized a kindred curiosity taking root in the child. A single beam of sunlight caught on a brass dial, glinting like a star fallen from the sky. Morty reached out instinctively, turning it just slightly. The device responded with a gentle whir, and the room filled with a sound that was almost musical, delicate and warm. Morty's eyes widened slightly, though not in surprise but in quiet wonder. He understood, in the way only a child can, that even the smallest touch could awaken something alive, something magical in its own gentle way. Rick noticed immediately. "You see that, Morty?" he whispered, his voice unusually soft. "Every little thing here, it's not just metal and wires. It's memory, it's possibility, it's alive if you listen." Morty nodded, though he didn't need the words to understand. He had been listening all along, to the hums, the vibrations, the pauses between each soft sound, and he knew Rick was right. Time passed in slow, measured breaths. The garage shifted as light changed, shadows leaning across workbenches and tools, revealing patterns that had been hidden just moments before. Morty felt the weight of stillness, the importance of quiet attention. He realized that this was where the first deep connections were formed, not in words or instructions, but in shared presence, in observing together, in understanding without needing to explain. By late afternoon, the hum had softened, the whispers retreating to corners, leaving only the soft resonance of calm. Morty stood near the window, gazing at the world outside. The trees swaying gently in the wind, a cloud drifting lazily across the sky, and felt a sense of completeness. The garage was more than a room. It was a sanctuary for reflection, a place where curiosity and care intertwined. Rick finally spoke again, gently, almost as if afraid to break the fragile quiet. "Morty, sometimes the world doesn't need fixing. Sometimes it just needs noticing." Morty smiled softly, understanding fully. He had begun to learn that the small acts of attention, the quiet gestures, and the ability to simply be present were themselves powerful, shaping the way he would grow and interact with the world and with Rick. As the evening light faded, casting long shadows across the garage, Morty felt a soft peace settle over him. The hum, the whispers, the gentle glow of machines, it all became part of a lullaby, a memory, and a promise. He knew that these quiet mornings, spent simply noticing, would echo through his life, teaching him patience, empathy, and the gentle art of connection. And so the garage whispered on, softly and persistently, as if assuring him that in the presence of care and attention, even the most ordinary things could hold extraordinary meaning. The night was quiet but not empty. Morty lay beneath the soft weight of his blanket, eyes closed, feeling the gentle pulse of the world outside his window. Somewhere beyond the walls of his room, the hum of distant machinery and the faint rustle of leaves carried a rhythm that seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. Sleep approached slowly, like a whisper across the skin, and with it came dreams that felt both familiar and strangely otherworldly. Rick's presence was nearby, steady and grounding, even as he tinkered softly in the garage. The sounds of gears and coils were not interruptions, but companions, weaving themselves into the gentle cadence of Morty's drifting thoughts. He imagined his dreams stretching outward, slipping between the spaces of night and the unknown, as though the universe itself leaned in to watch alongside him. These dreams were soft, surreal landscapes, places where reality and imagination brushed against each other without conflict. and where Morty could explore freely without fear. He walked through one such dream now. The ground beneath his feet shimmered like liquid silver, reflecting stars that had no names. Rivers of light curved gently around trees that glowed faintly from within, their leaves whispering secrets in a language Morty did not understand yet somehow comprehended. He felt no urgency here, no need to solve or accomplish anything. The landscapes themselves seemed to breathe, slow and patient, as if guiding him gently through a story written in moments rather than words. Rick appeared, not as an intruder, but as a companion. His silhouette was softened by the ambient light, and his usual sharp edges seemed rounded by the dream's gentle logic. He did not speak at first. Instead, he moved beside Morty with deliberate calm. His presence a reassurance that even in the most strange and shifting realms, there was someone to lean on, someone who understood the weight of wonder and the soft pull of curiosity. Morty realized that in these dreams, he could observe Rick differently, seeing not only the intellect and mischief, but the quiet thoughtfulness that usually hid beneath the surface. A gentle river wound between them, sparkling like molten glass under an unseen moon. Morty knelt and traced the water with his fingers, feeling the current tug lightly, as though the river itself were alive, offering guidance without demand. Rick knelt beside him, letting his hand hover above the water without touching, teaching by example rather than instruction. Morty felt the lesson clearly. Sometimes understanding comes not from words or explanation, but from witnessing and being present. The river spoke softly in ripples, carrying stories of distant stars, faint memories, and quiet lessons from worlds Morty had yet to visit. The dream shifted without warning, yet without fear. A bridge of clouds arched above them, carrying faint glowing motes of light that floated like fireflies. Morty stepped onto the clouds, feeling them support him with a gentle firmness, and he realized that the dreamscape did not impose limits. It only reflected the care and attention he brought with him. Rick followed, moving with the ease of someone who knew how to navigate both the familiar and the strange. Together they walked in silence, each step echoing the subtle truth that presence and attentiveness were more powerful than any words or actions. Time became a soft, pliable thing. Minutes stretched into eternities, and eternities folded back into the briefest flickers of awareness. Morty understood without fully understanding that these dreams were teaching him how to listen, to the world, to Rick, and to the quiet whispers inside himself. The subtle gestures, the pauses, the gentle hum of life surrounding them, all of it carried meaning if only one took the time to notice. Finally, the dream began to dissolve into morning light, the shimmering rivers folding into the walls of his room, the clouds of luminous guidance settling into shadows and corners. Morty opened his eyes slowly, carrying with him the echo of the dream's calm, its strange wisdom, and its soft reassurance. He felt a quiet warmth, a thread of connection to Rick, to the universe and to himself, woven in a way that needed no explanation. And so, as the real world crept softly into view, Morty realized that dreams could stretch him across dimensions without moving a single step in reality. They could teach him to notice, to care, and to find wonder in quiet, shifting patterns. And tonight, when he returned to sleep, the gentle lessons of rivers, clouds, and stars would wait patiently to guide him once more. The quiet of the evening settled like a soft blanket over the house. Rick sat alone in the garage, his tools resting after a day of careful tinkering. The air smelled faintly of oil, metal, and old parchment, a combination that felt like memory itself. He ran a hand over a polished surface, tracing the faint scratches left by past experiments. There was a rhythm to his motions, steady but not hurried, reflective rather than mechanical. In the silence he could feel the weight he carried, a burden that was both his gift and his solitude. Rick's genius had always been a light that shone far beyond the ordinary, yet the brightness came at a quiet cost. The ideas, the inventions, the infinite calculations, they were exhilarating, yes, but they also pulled him into a world where connection often felt secondary, where laughter sometimes became noise he could not hear. He felt it tonight, more clearly than usual, the subtle ache of understanding too much, knowing too much, and carrying it without anyone else to share the full weight. Morty appeared quietly at the garage door, his small presence barely disturbing the soft hum of the room. Rick glanced up, His expression softened in a way that only the boy seemed to draw from him. Morty did not speak immediately. He simply watched Rick, sensing the tension wrapped around his grandfather like a cloak, feeling the gentle weight of unspoken worries and untold stories. Morty had learned even at this young age that understanding did not always require words. Sometimes simply being present, observing without judgment, was enough. Rick sighed, a long, quiet exhalation that seemed to carry the accumulated gravity of years spent thinking, creating, and wondering. "Morty," he said softly, almost hesitant, "sometimes knowing too much, it makes the world heavier, and sometimes you carry it alone because no one else can quite see what you see." His voice was calm, not bitter, tinged with a melancholy that moved like a slow river beneath the surface. Morty took a small step closer, his gaze steady. I think you carry it so carefully because you care, Rick," he said, his voice gentle. "Even if it feels heavy, you're careful with it. Like it matters." Morty didn't fully understand the scope of what Rick meant, but he understood the feeling, the carefulness, the weight, the quiet responsibility. And in that understanding, Rick felt a flicker of relief, a soft acknowledgement that he was not entirely alone in his vigilance. The room seemed to breathe along with them, shadows shifting as the fading light brushed across the workbenches and the faintly glowing machines. Rick picked up a small device, turning it over in his hands, and for a moment it felt as though the weight of his intellect was suspended in the soft hum of the garage. Morty reached out, resting a hand on the edge of the table, connecting silently to the rhythm of the moment. There was no need for words. The silence carried everything necessary: respect, understanding, and shared presence. Rick's eyes softened further. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the weight isn't just the knowing, it's the caring. Caring about things you can't fix, about people who don't know what they mean to you, about mistakes that linger quietly." He paused, watching a small stream of light dance across the edge of a metal dial. "There's not a burden you can set down, Morty. You carry it and you fold it into who you are, and sometimes you teach others to carry it gently too." Morty nodded, his young mind absorbing what he could. He imagined the weight as a soft glow, a heavy warmth that could be shared if only carefully in moments like this. Even without fully grasping the intricacies of Rick's genius, he understood the heart of it, the quiet responsibility, the care threaded into every thought, every invention, every whispered plan. And in understanding, he felt a sense of closeness, a bond strengthened not by adventure, but by presence, attention, and subtle, shared acknowledgement. As the evening deepened into night, the soft hum of the garage seemed to carry a lullaby of its own, a song of knowledge, of care, of connection, of burdens held lightly in patient hands. Rick and Morty remained side by side, not speaking, but sharing something more profound than words, the recognition that wisdom could be both luminous and heavy, and that even the weightiest knowledge could be softened by quiet presence, empathy, and gentle understanding. The night continued to fold itself around the garage, drawing shadows into soft folds and leaving the two of them quietly together, tethered by understanding, curiosity, and care. And somewhere in the stillness, they both felt the subtle lesson: genius, no matter how heavy, could be carried with love. The house was quiet in that soft hour between midnight and early morning, when even the faintest sound seemed to hold a gentle weight. Morty padded carefully into the kitchen, toes brushing the cold floor, and found Rick already there, hunched over a small counter with a loaf of bread and a few slices of cheese. The dim light from the overhead lamp spilled softly across the room, bathing everything in a golden glow that felt comforting, almost sacred. Rick didn't look up at first. His hands moved with quiet precision, assembling sandwiches as if each layer, each fold, each careful slice carried a story that no words could tell. Morty watched, feeling the calm rhythm of the moment settle over him, as though the world itself had softened its edges. He realized then that these small, repeated acts, this simple preparation of food, were a kind of quiet ritual, a bond whispered rather than declared. He approached Rick slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile sense of calm. Do you want some help?" Morty asked softly, though he already knew the answer. Rick's hands paused for a brief moment, hovering over the bread before he offered a small approving nod. Together they worked in silence, stacking ingredients and pressing lightly with gentle hands. The act was ordinary, yet it felt extraordinary, an unspoken language of care and presence. The sandwiches were ready, and they carried them to the living room, where a patch of soft light from a lamp fell across the couch. They sat side by side, eating slowly, letting each bite linger. The crunch of bread, the soft warmth of cheese, and the faint aroma of toasted crust filled the room, mingling with the quiet hum of the house. There was no rush, no urgent conversation, only the comfort of shared space, the gentle reassurance of presence, and the subtle understanding that these quiet moments were as meaningful as any grand adventure. Rick broke the silence finally, in a voice soft enough to be almost a whisper. "You know, Morty, it's not always about saving the world or discovering the impossible. Sometimes it's about small things like this, sharing a sandwich, being here, not needing to do more than exist together for a while." Morty nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into his chest like a soft, glowing ember. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint echoes of leaves brushing against one another. The sound blended seamlessly with the soft rhythm of their chewing, the quiet hum of the lamp, and the faint scent of night settling around them. Morty realized that comfort could be as simple as this: a quiet act of care, a shared meal, a sense of being noticed and understood. It was not flashy, not loud, but it carried a gentle, enduring warmth that could fill the soul in a way no adventure could. They lingered there for a while, neither rushing nor speaking unnecessarily. Rick's hand occasionally brushed against Morty's, subtle but grounding, and Morty responded with a small, instinctive smile. Each gesture, each silence was an affirmation that even in a world filled with chaos, there existed these moments of stillness and connection, moments that could be returned to again and again, like bookmarks in a story that had no end. Rick broke another slice of bread, offering it to Morty with a soft smile that seemed almost private, meant only for him. Morty accepted, feeling a strange sense of gratitude for the simplicity, the ritual, the way a mundane act could carry so much weight without needing words. He realized that late-night sandwiches were more than food. They were a quiet anchor, a way to slow time, to breathe, and to remember that connection could be built in the most unassuming of ways. As the clock ticked softly, marking the gentle passage of minutes, Morty and Rick finished their sandwiches and leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the subtle symphony of the night. Outside, clouds drifted lazily across the moon, stars glimmering faintly behind them, and the house exhaled softly with the quiet of deep, restful understanding. These moments, Morty thought, were precious not for their drama, their spectacle, or their adventure, but for their quiet reassurance. They were proof that love could be small, persistent, and tender. And as they sat together, sharing silence, warmth, and bread, the world felt safer, softer, and infinitely more gentle than it had before. And so the night held them gently, a soft cocoon of presence, care, and quiet love, another small memory tucked carefully into the archive of growing hearts. The early morning air carried a gentle chill, soft and crisp, brushing against Morty's face as he and Rick made their way toward the river that curved lazily beyond the outskirts of the neighborhood. The world felt still, the kind of quiet that invited reflection, where even the smallest sound, a bird's tentative chirp, the rustle of a leaf, was amplified into significance. Morty walked beside Rick, matching his pace without speaking, feeling the rhythm of each footfall as if it were part of a larger, unspoken conversation. The river lay before them like a mirror, reflecting pale strands of morning light and clouds drifting slowly across the sky. Its surface shimmered gently, each ripple carrying the faintest whisper of stories, secrets, and distant memories. Morty leaned closer, eyes tracing the soft flow of water, and he felt as though the river were speaking to him, not in words but in sensations, impulses of thought and emotion that resonated quietly within his chest. Rick settled on a nearby rock, the soles of his boots touching the sand with a soft scrape. "Rivers," he murmured, his voice low, almost lost in the morning stillness, "have a way of reminding us of time, of change, and of what we can carry without ever knowing it's there." Morty tilted his head, feeling the subtle gravity in Rick's words. There was no urgency in them, only presence, a patient acknowledgement of the quiet truths that flow through life unnoticed. Morty dipped his fingers into the water, watching the gentle eddies curl around his hand. The coolness of the river seemed to carry memories, both familiar and strange, as though each current held fragments of moments that had passed unnoticed. Rick observed silently, his expression thoughtful. Morty realized that the river did more than reflect their surroundings. It reflected them, too, showing glimpses of their own hearts and thoughts in the soft patterns of motion. A small bird landed nearby, drinking from the edge of the water. Morty smiled faintly, noting the bird's delicate, careful movements. Rick's gaze followed his, and for a quiet moment they shared a simple observation without needing to speak further. Morty understood that the world in its quietest corners was full of gentle reminders of patience and attentiveness, that the river's song was composed not in grand gestures, but in the soft, persistent flow of life. Rick began to hum softly, almost imperceptibly. It was a low melodic hum, shaped like a lullaby but carrying the weight of experience, of knowledge, of countless choices made and lessons learned. Morty listened, feeling the resonance not only in his ears but in his chest, as if the sound had the power to gently untangle knots of worry and confusion. The river seemed to respond, ripples catching the light in subtle patterns, as though acknowledging the quiet hymn being offered. They remained there for a long time, letting the river speak in its own language of motion, light and reflection. Morty noticed the small details, the way the current curved around rocks, the way leaves floated briefly before being carried away, the soft chorus of insects hidden in the grass. He understood without words that these gentle acts were part of the river's story, part of the world's unspoken dialogue, and part of what he could carry with him if he paid attention. Rick reached out, letting his hand hover above the surface, feeling the gentle tug of currents beneath. "Life isn't always about changing the course," he said softly. "Morty, sometimes it's about noticing how it moves, how it shapes itself, and how you move alongside it. The river teaches patience if you're willing to listen." Morty nodded, feeling the truth of the words settle into him. Listening, he realized, could be as meaningful as action, as comforting as care, and as profound as any adventure. The sun rose higher, casting pale golden light across the rippling surface. Morty and Rick stood together, not speaking, but connected in quiet understanding. The river whispered on, carrying its timeless song, teaching them about presence, reflection, and the subtle ways that small gestures and attentiveness could ripple outward. And when they finally left, the memory of the river lingered soft and persistent, like a gentle echo in the heart, reminding them that in stillness, in observation, and in quiet companionship, there was a wealth of knowledge. Care and love flowing constantly, patiently, quietly, just waiting to be noticed. The house appeared at the edge of the clearing, half hidden behind a veil of fog and soft shadows. Its windows were dimly lit, glowing faintly like quiet lanterns guiding travelers home. Yet there was a strange familiarity in its form, as if Morty had always known it without ever seeing it before. Rick paused at the gate, letting the wind carry faint whispers across the yard, the voices soft and undecipherable but heavy with memory. Morty followed, sensing that this place held more than walls and furniture. It held echoes, pieces of life folded into corners and tucked behind doors. Inside, the house breathed with a gentle rhythm, as though it were aware of their presence. The floorboards murmured softly underfoot, and the walls seemed to hum with stories half-remembered. Rick led the way, moving quietly, his eyes scanning the room with that familiar mixture of curiosity and reflection. Morty followed, letting the silence guide him, aware that every creak, every faint flicker of light carried meaning. There was no urgency here, no need to understand everything. The house offered only presence, and that was enough. Shadows leaned along the corners of rooms, stretching and curling like living tendrils, yet they were not menacing. Instead, they seemed protective, holding memories in soft embrace. Morty could feel the weight of countless moments, both joyous and sorrowful, tucked into the air like invisible companions. Rick moved closer to a window, gazing at the muted sunlight filtering through the dust, and Morty realized that the house itself was teaching them to notice, to observe, to listen to what was present without demanding explanation. A soft draft stirred papers on a table, revealing sketches and notes that seemed impossibly familiar. Morty bent down, recognizing lines that echoed ideas he had seen Rick contemplate before. The house, he understood, held the past in a way that was tender and patient, allowing the living to connect with what had come before without forcing them to confront it too sharply. He felt a strange calm, a gentle melancholy that didn't sting but instead wrapped around him like a warm shawl. Rick knelt beside a low shelf, lifting a small, weathered object. It hummed faintly, a vibration that resonated through the quiet room, a whisper of energy that seemed alive. "Everything here," Rick murmured, voice low and reverent, "has a memory. Every hum, every creak, every whisper you hear, it's someone's moment folded into this place." Morty nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. He didn't need to understand fully. He only needed to feel the care embedded in each detail. The two of them moved together through the house, each room revealing fragments of laughter, quiet regrets, and subtle joys. Morty noticed the way Rick's gaze softened at certain corners, how his hand lingered briefly on a chair or shelf, as if acknowledging the life it had once carried. Morty himself began to notice patterns, little motifs of repeated gestures, familiar shapes in the whispers and shadows. The house taught them that memory was alive, flowing gently, and that listening carefully could reveal its lessons. In a small study, Rick sat on the floor, leaning back against the wall, eyes closed as if listening to the subtle heartbeat of the house. Morty sat beside him, matching the quiet stillness. The house hummed, breathed, and whispered, carrying the weight of generations softly between them. Morty understood that it was not the loud moments, the dramatic upheavals, or the extraordinary events that defined life. It was the quiet presence, the attentive observation, and the gentle care woven into ordinary existence. They left the house slowly, stepping back into the clearing where the fog still lingered, carrying the soft residue of whispers in their hearts. Rick glanced at Morty, a faint smile crossing his face, and Morty returned it, recognizing that this visit had been more than a journey through space. It had been a journey through understanding, reflection, and quiet emotional growth. As the day began to lighten the sky, Morty felt the gentle imprint of the house lingering within him. Its whispers, its soft presence, its patient attention to every detail would remain as a subtle guide, teaching him to notice, to care, and to carry memory gently in every step he took. The House of Whispers, he realized, would always speak to those willing to pause and listen. Long after the footsteps had faded and the doors had closed, the evening settled gently, folding the sky into soft shades of indigo and violet. Morty and Rick wandered along a quiet lane, the air humming faintly with the familiar cadence of night. Streetlights glowed like tiny lanterns, their warmth casting pools of comfort across the cobblestones. Morty noticed the subtle sway of a branch that had caught a small bird's nest, precarious yet cradled by the tree, and felt the quiet pull of attentiveness, the same gentle awareness Rick had taught him to carry. They passed a small shop with its windows shuttered, but a faint light escaped through a crack. Morty glanced inside and saw a stray cat, its fur ruffled and eyes wary. Without a word, Rick bent down, reaching into his coat pocket for a scrap of bread he had tucked away. He placed it softly near the cat, who approached cautiously before settling to nibble. Morty watched, feeling the subtle lesson in action, that care need not be loud, that kindness often hid in the smallest gestures, unnoticed by the world but meaningful all the same. Morty's gaze drifted to a small boy sitting on the curb nearby, hugging his knees and staring into the night. His shoes were worn, and his jacket hung loosely around his shoulders. Rick knelt beside him, speaking nothing, simply offering the warmth of his presence. Morty followed, sitting on the curb at a careful distance, letting the silence between them speak volumes. The boy's lips curled slightly, a faint acknowledgement that someone cared even without words. Morty realized that these quiet moments, the shared warmth, the attentive eyes, the simple act of noticing, were as heroic as any battle, as powerful as any grand gesture. Further along the lane, a small plant had sprung through a crack in the pavement, leaves trembling in the night breeze. Rick and Morty stopped, and Rick cupped the fragile sprout gently in his hands, turning it slightly to catch the moonlight. Morty felt the soft pulse of life, so small, so easily overlooked, yet full of quiet persistence. Rick whispered, almost to himself, "Even the smallest things deserve care, Morty. The ones that grow in silence sometimes teach the loudest lessons." Morty nodded, sensing the truth in the words. It was not the grand, sweeping acts that defined them, but the patience, attention, and tenderness poured into ordinary life. They continued, encountering neighbors leaving small packages on doorsteps for those who might need them, warm gestures of unspoken understanding. Morty noticed the way Rick slowed slightly, watching these moments with a faint smile, and he understood that Rick carried a quiet hope that these small acts rippled outward. Each gesture, no matter how unnoticed, had the power to comfort, to connect, and to heal in subtle, persistent ways. The night air thickened with soft mist, carrying the faint aroma of distant rain and damp earth. Morty felt a gentle warmth in his chest as he realized that he too could participate in this quiet heroism. Every glance, every nod, every gentle word, every touch of kindness was a thread woven into the fabric of the world, binding it together in ways often unseen but profoundly felt. Rick moved silently beside him, a steady reminder that presence alone could be enough. They paused by a small bridge over a softly flowing creek. Rick leaned on the railing, watching the water shimmer under the moonlight. Morty stepped beside him, noticing a small note caught on a branch, a fragment of someone's intention to be thoughtful, left behind for the world to find. He picked it up carefully, reading the faint script, and felt the quiet truth of it resonate within him. That life's significance often came not from dramatic moments, but from the tender consistency of thoughtful actions repeated softly. Day by day, the night deepened around them, folding the lane, the creek, and the soft glow of distant houses into a cocoon of tranquility. Morty understood fully and gently that these small acts of care were not mere gestures. They were the essence of quiet heroism, the soft pulse of goodness that moved steadily, imperceptibly through the world. And in that understanding, he felt an unfamiliar lightness, a sense that even the heaviest burdens could be carried when shared in silence, with presence and with care. As they walked home, the whispers of the night lingered in Morty's mind, threading together lessons of empathy, attentiveness, and subtle courage. Each small act they had witnessed or performed felt like a star in a vast, quiet sky, illuminating the way through darkness, guiding them gently, reassuringly, toward a world shaped not by noise, but by the soft insistence of kindness repeated, softly, faithfully, endlessly. The sky had turned a soft slate gray, heavy with clouds that seemed to hover just above the treetops. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it a faint scent of rain and distant earth. Morty and Rick walked along a familiar path, the quiet tension in the air tangible yet not alarming. It was the kind of storm that spoke not in thunderous declarations, but in gentle reminders of change, of endings, and of what must be released to grow anew. Rick's gaze drifted upward, tracing the movement of clouds that shifted slowly, like thoughts rearranging themselves in the mind. Sometimes, he murmured softly, the storms that feel quiet, they're the ones that carry the most. The ones that remind you that nothing stays the same, no matter how much you wish it would. Morty glanced at him, feeling the weight of those words settle like a soft rain inside him. Change had always been a presence in their lives, subtle yet persistent, shaping their days without announcing itself. The first drops fell with delicate precision, tiny beads of water that kissed the ground, the leaves, and the surface of puddles forming along the path. Morty lifted a hand, letting a droplet slide across his palm, marveling at how something so small could feel significant. Rick stood beside him, silent, his eyes reflective. Morty realized that this quiet storm was not a threat, but a teacher. Its soft rhythm asked them to slow, to listen, to witness the subtle dance of impermanence that flowed around and through every living thing. They reached a bench overlooking a small pond, the water mirroring the muted sky above. The surface rippled gently as raindrops touched it, each circle expanding outward, intersecting and overlapping in a silent, intricate pattern. Morty sat down, pulling his knees close to his chest, and Rick joined him without a word. The two of them watched the pond, letting the rain and the quiet merge into a gentle lullaby, a song of reflection and understanding. Rick spoke then, in a voice softer than the rain itself. You know, Morty, storms like this remind you that not all loss is loud. Not all change screams for attention. Sometimes it arrives quietly, and you only realize its presence when you take a breath and notice the gaps it leaves behind. Morty nodded slowly, sensing the layers of meaning beneath his grandfather's words. There was a sorrow here, yes, but also a kind of clarity, a soft illumination that revealed how fleeting moments could be both beautiful and necessary. A small frog emerged from the reeds, its movements careful and deliberate, navigating the wet terrain with a quiet persistence. Morty smiled faintly, recognizing in the creature the same resilience he had seen in Rick, in himself, and in the subtle moments that made up their lives. The storm, he realized, was not something to be feared but something to be acknowledged, a gentle force that shaped growth, reflection, and understanding without ever raising its voice. Rick picked up a small stick, tracing circles in the damp earth, watching the patterns merge with the puddles forming nearby. Morty noticed how each mark seemed to hold a rhythm, a cadence that mirrored the soft fall of rain, the sway of the trees, and the measured heartbeat of the world around them. Life, Rick said softly, isn't just what you do in the sun. It's also how you weather the quiet storms, are the ones that come without warning, and learn what they have to teach you. Morty leaned back, feeling the damp earth beneath him and the gentle hum of rain in the trees. He understood with a growing certainty that these quiet storms were a natural part of life, moments of reflection, of melancholy, of acceptance. They carried lessons of impermanence, patience, and the subtle beauty of letting go. Each drop, each ripple, each whisper of wind was a reminder that even when the world shifted, they could remain rooted, present, and attentive. As the rain softened into a mist, Morty and Rick rose slowly, leaving the pond behind. The clouds drifted higher, lightening as though carrying the storm's lessons with them. Morty felt a gentle clarity settle in his chest, a sense that the quiet storm had not taken anything from him, but had offered something far more enduring: perspective, understanding, and the soft reassurance that change, even when melancholy, could be gentle, luminous, and ultimately nurturing. And as they walked home through the damp night, the soft whisper of rain lingering in their minds, Morty realized that even the quietest storms could leave a mark of grace, patience, and quiet strength, one that would echo softly through the days to come. The night had settled like a soft blanket over the quiet house, and Morty found himself at the small desk tucked into the corner of Rick's workshop. A stack of papers lay before him, edges slightly curled, waiting with a kind of patient stillness. Rick had been silent for hours, tinkering gently with small devices that hummed and glowed faintly, as though aware of the weight of unspoken words in the room. Morty picked up a sheet, pen poised, feeling the gentle pressure of possibility. What to say, what to leave unsaid, and what could remain forever private. He began writing slowly, letting the thoughts flow without interruption. Each sentence was a soft admission, a careful observation of love, regret, and understanding. Morty found that words he might never speak aloud could live here, on the page, carrying fragments of his heart safely into the quiet night. Rick glanced up briefly, his eyes catching Morty's, and Morty felt the subtle reassurance that these letters, even if never sent, were meaningful. Presence, he realized, could exist without delivery, without recognition, without response. The first letter was to Summer, though he didn't intend to mail it. "I notice you," Morty wrote softly, "even when the world rushes past. I see your quiet strength, your laughter, and even your moments of doubt. I hope you know that I'm here, even if I don't always say it." He left it unfolded on the desk, letting the words breathe in the space around him. Each letter, he realized, was a small act of care, a gentle acknowledgement that love and understanding could exist quietly, without fanfare. Rick moved closer, setting down a small glowing device that pulsed faintly in the dim light. "Letters," Rick said softly, "aren't always about delivery. Sometimes they're about remembering to notice, to reflect, to put the world into perspective. So even if no one else ever reads them." Morty nodded, feeling the depth in Rick's words, sensing that these unsent letters were like seeds planted in silence, waiting to grow in subtle ways within themselves. Rather than in the world, Morty wrote another letter, this one to Rick himself, though it would remain unseen. "How you don't have to fix everything," he wrote, pen moving slowly, deliberately. "Sometimes it's enough that you're here, that you listen, that you share moments in silence. I understand more than I let on, and I carry it quietly with me every day." He paused, reading the words aloud softly to himself. The act of writing, of shaping thoughts into ink, seemed to settle something restless inside him, a gentle exhale of emotions that had lingered too long without acknowledgement. Outside, The wind whispered softly through the trees, and the faint hum of the city in the distance blended with the quieter noises of the house. Morty felt the small vibrations of the world beneath him, a reminder that even private words had a resonance, subtle but profound. Rick had returned to his work, and Morty realized that the shared silence between them carried as much weight as any spoken conversation. Presence, acknowledgement, and care could exist without the need for completion or response. The final letter he wrote that night was for himself, an unspoken promise. "I will notice the quiet moments," he wrote, "the stillness in others, the soft gestures that matter. I will hold the small acts of love and kindness carefully, as though they are treasures. And I will understand that even when words remain unsent, they can carry meaning." Morty folded it gently, placing it beneath the others, a silent archive of thought and feeling, untouched yet infinitely alive. Rick glanced at him one last time, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Morty returned it, feeling a gentle warmth settle in his chest. The unsent letters, he realized, were more than confessions or reflections. They were bridges connecting moments, feelings, and understanding in ways that didn't require acknowledgement from the world. They were small, quiet acts of care, ripples that would remain in the heart, shaping perception, empathy, and growth in subtle, enduring ways. As the night deepened, Morty set down his pen, letting the soft quiet of the workshop fill him. He understood that letters never sent were not wasted. They were proof that care, reflection, and love could exist without expectation. They were an intimate act, a gentle gesture, a quiet testament to the resilience and attentiveness of the heart. And as he finally lay down to rest, the letters safe in their quiet stack, Morty felt the soft satisfaction of presence, care, and understanding. The night hummed gently around him, carrying the quiet reassurance that words, actions, and love, even unspoken or unsent, could still ripple softly through the world and through the heart. The lab was quiet, a sanctuary of glass and softly humming machinery. Morty stepped inside cautiously, feeling the familiar weight of Rick's presence beside him. Mirrors lined the walls, some tall and narrow, others wide, reflecting distorted yet familiar versions of himself and Rick. The air smelled faintly of metal and ozone, tinged with a hint of something more elusive, memory, perhaps, or the faint echo of choices not made. Morty paused, letting the quiet settle over him like a gentle fog. Rick moved with deliberate calm, adjusting a small device that projected a soft glow across the mirrored surfaces. "Mirrors," Rick said, his voice low, "aren't just for looking at yourself. They're for seeing what could have been, what you almost were, and what you still might become. And sometimes they help you understand who you already are." Morty nodded slowly, feeling the weight of reflection settle in his chest. The lab, with all its gleaming glass and humming energy, seemed less like a place of science and more like a quiet space for introspection. Morty stepped closer to one of the tall mirrors. His reflection stared back, but it was slightly different, subtly older, slightly braver, and yet tinged with a quiet melancholy. He saw a version of himself who had been more cautious, more withdrawn, yet also more attentive to the small acts of kindness around him. Another mirror reflected a Morty who had taken greater risks, eyes wide with wonder, yet carrying subtle regret. He realized that every reflection, though unfamiliar in detail, resonated with him. Each one was a soft reminder of the choices that shaped him, the paths that had led here, and the possibilities still unfolding. Rick approached a mirror of his own reflection, older and wearier than usual, yet softened by the presence of someone who mattered deeply, Morty. His eyes lingered on the faint lines of experience, the subtle shadows that told stories of loss, regret, and understanding. Morty watched quietly, realizing that Rick carried the weight of knowledge not with arrogance, but with a tempered gentleness that often went unnoticed. The mirrored surfaces reflected more than appearances. They reflected care, patience, and quiet heroism. They moved together through the lab, pausing at mirrors that revealed faint, almost imperceptible variations of themselves. Morty noticed a version of Rick who had chosen to stay closer, to linger more often in the quiet moments. He saw a Morty who had spoken more freely, embraced opportunities for gentleness, and nurtured the subtle bonds that defined their relationship. Each reflection whispered softly, carrying lessons of understanding, acceptance, and the nuanced beauty of imperfection. Rick reached out, placing a hand gently against the glass. "See, Morty? Every version of you, every possibility. They're not failures, they're echoes. They show what matters: presence, reflection, and small acts of care. Not grand gestures, not loud heroics, just this." He nodded toward the mirror, toward Morty, and toward the soft hum of the lab. Morty understood without words. This was not about changing the past. It was about noticing the present, understanding the self, and carrying it forward gently. Morty touched his reflection, feeling a warmth that seemed to pass through the glass. For a moment he imagined reaching out to every version of himself, the hesitant, the brave, the cautious, the curious, and offering the same quiet reassurance. That soft presence, he realized, was the quietest form of guidance, the most enduring form of care. Rick's eyes met his again, conveying the same sentiment without need for speech. The lab hummed softly, the mirrors catching and scattering light like faint stars suspended in the room. Morty felt a calm settle into his chest, a deep acknowledgement that he had grown through observation, reflection, and quiet understanding. Each reflection was not a threat, not a comparison. It was a gentle echo, a soft reminder of empathy, resilience, and the unspoken threads that connected them. As they left the lab, stepping into the dim evening, the mirrored images lingered in Morty's mind, not as regrets but as tender reminders. Every choice, every possibility, every quiet reflection shaped who they were in subtle ways, like a gentle river carving a path through stone. Morty understood that the lessons of the Mirror Lab would remain with him always, quietly guiding him toward presence, care, and a deep, unspoken understanding of life's soft, reflective truths. The night wrapped the world in a deep, velvety blue, and stars began to twinkle softly overhead, distant yet comforting in their constancy. Morty and Rick sat on the porch, the wooden boards cool beneath their hands, the gentle hum of the night alive around them. A faint breeze stirred the leaves, carrying whispers that seemed to flow from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was the kind of night that asked for attention, patience, and quiet reflection, perfect for conversations that needed no urgency. Rick leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of the evening. Morty sat beside him, shoulders relaxed, noticing how the wind moved like a soft exhale across the world. "Sometimes," Rick said softly, "the things you don't say, the ones that stay in your chest, they have a way of finding their own voice in the night. If you listen carefully, Morty, you'll hear them." Morty nodded, sensing that the stillness itself carried meaning, a gentle invitation to openness and understanding. They spoke quietly, their voices low, almost blending into the night. Morty told stories of small observations, of acts of kindness he had noticed or performed, the little ways people supported each other without expecting recognition. Rick listened without interruption, occasionally murmuring a soft acknowledgement or a quiet laugh that seemed to ripple through the darkness. There was no rush, no demand, only the comforting cadence of presence and attention. The porch light cast a faint glow, illuminating their faces in warm, muted tones. Shadows danced along the edges of the boards and the surrounding plants, creating a moving tapestry that seemed alive with gentle intention. Morty noticed how the subtle movements of the night mirrored the unspoken connections between them. The soft rise and fall of breath, the silent understanding, the shared awareness that sometimes silence was the clearest expression of care. A pair of fireflies drifted past, leaving tiny trails of light that flickered briefly and vanished. Morty watched, captivated by the fleeting glow, and felt the same fragility in human moments. The small gestures, the whispered words, the soft touch of attention that might last only an instant, yet linger quietly in memory. Rick reached out, letting a firefly settle on his finger, its light pulsing gently. "Even the smallest lights," he murmured, "can show you the way if you pay attention." Morty understood the metaphor without needing to name it. The night itself had already whispered its lesson. They spoke of fears and regrets, the quiet uncertainties that lingered like shadows just beyond sight. Morty shared moments of doubt, of times he felt unseen or unheard. Rick responded not with solutions or fixes, but with presence, an attentive gaze, a steady shoulder, a hand that rested gently without demanding movement. In that stillness, Morty realized that emotional connection did not always require words. Sometimes simply being there, witnessing, listening, and allowing space for vulnerability was the most profound act of care. The wind carried soft murmurs through the trees, almost like voices recalling memories long past. Morty imagined them as echoes of all the small acts of love, trust and understanding that had shaped their lives. Each whisper was gentle but insistent, reminding him that connection was built over time, in quiet moments, in gestures too subtle to be noticed immediately. He felt the depth of this invisible network of care and warmth, realizing that it had always been present, guiding him softly like the stars above. Rick's voice broke the silence again, quieter now, almost a lullaby. "Morty, life isn't about loud declarations or dramatic gestures. It's about the whispers, the nighttime moments, the things you feel in your chest when the world isn't watching. That's where meaning lives." Morty closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the night, letting the words settle and fold into him. He understood in a soft, luminous way that these shared whispers would carry them forward, anchoring them in quiet understanding and trust. As the night deepened, Morty felt a gentle exhale within himself, a release of tension and a subtle acknowledgement of love, care and presence. The whispers of the night, the pulse of the stars and Rick's quiet companionship wove together into a lullaby of connection. Morty knew that no matter what storms or choices awaited, these gentle moments would remain, a quiet reservoir of warmth, trust, and understanding to guide them both. And as they finally rose from the porch, the night seemed to hum softly around them, carrying the whispers, the memories, and the gentle reassurance that the quiet presence of care could be more enduring than any spoken word. The night was unusually still, almost as if the world had been holding its breath. A thin crescent moon hung low in the sky, spilling pale light across the quiet street. Morty sat on the edge of the porch steps, legs dangling, while Rick stood silently beside him, his usual restless energy softened by a rare stillness. The air carried the faint scent of rain from earlier, mingling with the distant hum of city life, muted and gentle. Rick shifted his weight, his gaze distant, as though tracing paths he had walked long ago. Morty sensed the quiet tension, the internal deliberation that hung like a fragile thread between them. "Morty," Rick said softly, voice low enough to blend with the night, "sometimes I think about leaving, walking away, disappearing from all of this." The words landed like a gentle tremor in the quiet. Not a storm, but a subtle reminder of fragility, of choices weighed carefully in the mind. Morty's heart tightened, but he remained still, listening. He knew this wasn't an outburst or anger, but a quiet reckoning, a moment of vulnerability Rick rarely allowed himself to show. "And if you did," Morty whispered, "what would you hope for?" Rick didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, feeling it fold around them like a soft cloak. The stars above shimmered faintly, scattered across the inky sky, and Morty imagined them as witnesses, quiet and eternal. He noticed the way Rick's shadow stretched across the porch, reaching toward him, grounding him in subtle ways. "I don't know," Rick finally murmured. "Maybe. I just wonder if it would change anything, or if I'd even notice. The world moves on, whether I'm here or not." His voice was reflective, not despairing, an acknowledgement of impermanence and the quiet weight of presence. Morty leaned slightly closer, feeling the warmth of connection that had carried him through countless adventures, both strange and familiar. "You're here now," he said softly, "and that's what matters. You don't have to fix everything. Just stay. That's enough." Rick looked at him, and for a moment, the usual sharpness in his eyes softened into something almost luminous. Relief, understanding, and quiet trust. The gentle night seemed to pause. The air filled with soft motifs, whispers of wind through leaves, distant lights blinking faintly, the comforting rhythm of a world moving steadily onward. Morty realized that this was more than a conversation. It was a quiet exchange of presence and reassurance, a soft affirmation that even in moments of doubt, they were tethered to each other, anchored in care and unspoken loyalty. Rick exhaled slowly, a sound that blended with the faint rustling of the trees. "I guess. I just needed to know that someone notices," he said quietly. Morty nodded, understanding that notice, acknowledgement, and presence were sometimes more vital than words, explanations, or actions. Being there simply was a gift that could steady hearts, even those burdened with restless minds and complex truths. Connection, reflection, and the gentle assurance that no one needed to bear solitude alone. The porch light cast a faint halo around them, illuminating the gentle contours of the night. Morty watched the way Rick's hand twitched slightly, a subtle sign of tension, and he reached over, placing a hand lightly on Rick's shoulder. The touch was unspoken, unhurried, yet spoke volumes, an affirmation that presence, care, and understanding could quiet the heaviest of internal storms. Minutes stretched gently, the kind that felt longer than they were, allowing the quiet between them to settle. Rick finally nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if accepting the soft tether Morty offered. Morty realized that the night had not been about decisions or ultimatums, but about, as they finally rose, stepping off the porch into the soft embrace of the evening, Morty felt the night exhale around them. The moment lingered, a quiet echo that would ripple through their shared experiences, a reminder that even when absence loomed in thought, presence and care could tether hearts gently, silently, and profoundly, and as the moonlight bathed the path ahead, Morty knew that the quiet reassurance of staying, simply being there, was the most enduring act of courage and love. The fire crackled softly, its amber glow spilling warmth into the small room. Shadows danced along the walls, flickering gently like memories waking for a moment before sinking back into quiet reflection. Morty sat cross-legged on a worn rug, hands resting loosely on his knees, while Rick lounged in the armchair nearby, the faint hum of his presence as familiar as the soft whisper of embers. The night outside was deep and still, a velvet backdrop to the comforting ritual of shared silence. Rick hummed quietly, a tune so soft it almost blended with the occasional pop from the fireplace. Morty closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over him like a gentle tide. It was not a song meant for performance or grandeur, but for remembrance, for the small anchoring of heart and mind. In its simplicity, Morty felt a profound reassurance, the kind that only comes from knowing someone is near, steady, and attentive without expectation. The two of them shared stories in the hush between hums and crackles, voices low and even, carrying memories rather than facts. Morty spoke of fleeting moments he had cherished, the soft smile of a stranger, the unexpected kindness of a friend, the quiet courage it took to remain present when the world seemed to rush past. Rick listened, nodding occasionally, humming in response, letting each story nestle gently into the warmth of the fire-lit room. Outside, the wind rustled faintly through the trees, a whispering accompaniment to their conversation. Morty noticed the way the light played across Rick's face, illuminating the subtle lines etched by laughter, worry, and reflection. Each shadow seemed alive with memory, a soft testament to years of choices, experiences, and quiet moments of care. Morty realized that the fire and the hum were more than comfort. They were a medium for reflection, a gentle way to carry the past into the present with warmth and acknowledgement. Rick reached for a small cup of tea, the steam curling lazily upward, catching the glow of the fire. "You know, Morty," he said softly, "it's the little things that build the most meaning. Not inventions, not adventures, not loud gestures. Just presence, stories, hums, small acts that anchor you to the world and each other." Morty nodded, feeling the truth of that statement settle like a soft exhale in his chest. Presence, he realized, could transform ordinary nights into moments of enduring grace. Morty hummed quietly in return, imperfectly matching Rick's tune, letting their voices blend in a gentle duet. The sound was soothing, a lullaby for the mind and heart, a quiet affirmation that connection need not always be spoken. The fire reflected in their eyes, twinkling with memory and warmth, a mirror for the gentle, enduring bond they had nurtured through countless small gestures, shared silences, and mutual understanding. A faint gust of wind brushed the window, rattling the glass slightly, but it only added to the rhythm of the room, the soft hum of the fire, the murmur of memory, the gentle resonance of presence. Morty felt a profound sense of calm, as if the world itself had slowed to honor this moment, allowing him to breathe, to reflect, and to anchor himself in the quiet grace of companionship. Rick's hum shifted slightly, a tender variation that carried unspoken thoughts, a reminder of past adventures and quiet lessons learned. Morty responded with his own gentle cadence, their shared music weaving an invisible thread through time and memory, linking past, present, and the subtle promise of all the moments yet to come. The fire dimmed slightly as the night deepened, but its warmth remained, a constant companion to the hum and the stories that lingered in the space between words. Morty realized that this simple ritual, fire, hum, shared presence, was more than comfort. It was a gentle legacy, a quiet testament to the enduring value of being there, listening and holding space for one another in the softest, most profound ways. And as the embers glowed low, Rick and Morty allowed the silence to fill the room, letting the hum continue in their hearts, a subtle reminder that even in quiet, the world carried warmth, connection, and enduring care. The fire, the hum, and the shared presence became a lullaby for the soul, echoing softly as the night carried them into reflection and rest. The sky was a deep, velvety indigo brushed with the softest hints of twilight. Clouds floated slowly, drifting without urgency, reshaping themselves as they moved across the horizon. Morty and Rick sat quietly on a gentle hill, legs dangling over the edge, watching the sky's silent performance. There was no rush to speak, no need to fill the space with noise. The night itself seemed to encourage reflection, patience, and gentle wonder. Morty's eyes followed the clouds as they shifted, some glowing faintly in the last traces of sunlight, others fading into the encroaching darkness. "They just keep moving," he whispered. "No matter what happens down here, they go on." Rick nodded, his gaze fixed on the slow dance above. "Everything drifts, Morty," he murmured softly. "Regrets, worries, even the heaviness we carry. Some clouds hang longer than others, but eventually, they all move on." The air was cool but not cold, carrying the faint scent of distant rain and the soft hum of nighttime life. Morty felt a subtle exhale within himself, a release he hadn't realized he needed. The clouds above seemed like gentle reminders that impermanence was part of the world, that even moments of tension, doubt, or sorrow would eventually soften and drift away, leaving room for quiet renewal. Rick reached out and plucked a small flower growing at the edge of the hill, letting it rest between his fingers. "Notice how even small things survive while the world moves," he said softly. "They bend, they sway, they endure, but they keep existing in the flow. Life is like that, Morty. The clouds drift, but the ground remains, holding the little acts of care, of love, of understanding, steady and enduring." Morty considered this, watching the cloud shapes change, letting the analogy settle gently into his mind. For a while, they didn't speak, only watching the slow drift of shapes overhead. Morty noticed clouds that seemed familiar, reminiscent of past regrets, moments he wished he had handled differently, and small joys that had passed quietly but left traces of warmth. Each one moved across the sky at its own pace, independent yet connected to the larger rhythm of the night. He understood, without needing words, that memories and experiences like clouds could shift and soften without being erased. Rick hummed quietly, a soft tune that blended with the sighing wind. Morty joined in, a gentle, imperfect echo that carried across the hill. The shared hums became a lullaby of sorts, wrapping around them both, a subtle reinforcement of presence, understanding, and continuity. Each note was a reminder that care did not require words, and love did not demand action beyond what could be offered softly, patiently, and consistently. As they watched, a particularly dark cloud drifted past a faintly glowing crescent moon, and Morty thought of moments he had carried with tension or unease. Rick noticed his gaze and said quietly, "See, Morty, even the darker clouds move on. They shift, fade, and give way to lighter shapes. The heaviness isn't permanent, and neither are the mistakes we dwell on. Everything drifts." Morty let that sink in, feeling a gentle relief, as if the night itself were exhaling with him, allowing the weight to soften and lift. The wind stirred the grass at their feet, and the distant hum of the world seemed to pulse in rhythm with their quiet reflection. Morty realized that watching the clouds drift was not just a metaphor, it was a practice. The act of noticing, of letting go, of simply being present in the flow, created a subtle space of calm, understanding, and emotional release. Rick shifted slightly, adjusting his position, letting the warmth of the night settle in his chest. Morty mirrored him, feeling the soft rhythm of shared silence and reflection. They didn't need to speak further. The clouds above, drifting lazily across the sky, whispered their lessons in patience, impermanence, and quiet acceptance. And in that gentle, unhurried observation, Morty felt an enduring calm take root, a reminder that even when life's currents seem heavy, everything drifts eventually, making room for peace, clarity, and soft wonder. As the night deepened, they rose from the hill, leaving the drifting clouds behind, carrying their lessons quietly into the heart. Morty understood that some of life's most profound insights came not from words or actions, but from watching, waiting, and allowing the world's gentle rhythms to teach their lessons in silence. The room was hushed, bathed in the faint glow of a lamp that flickered just enough to cast soft, elongated shadows across the walls. Morty sat cross-legged on the floor, knees tucked in, while Rick leaned back in a chair, eyes half closed, letting the quiet stretch around them like a gentle blanket. Outside, the wind whispered softly against the windows, carrying faint echoes of distant life, muted and soothing. It was a night designed for reflection, a space where silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Morty shifted slightly, noticing how the absence of noise allowed him to perceive subtleties he often overlooked. The faint hum of the heater, the soft creak of the chair, the barely perceptible rhythm of Rick's breathing. In that stillness, he realized how much meaning had been hiding in the spaces between words, in the pauses and gentle exhalations of presence. There was a gift in silence, he understood, a way of communicating care, trust, and understanding without uttering a single syllable. Rick reached for a small cup of tea, letting the steam curl upward in delicate spirals that caught the light. He didn't speak, but Morty sensed the depth of intention behind the gesture. The quiet companionship itself was a message. I am here. I see you. I am present. Morty's chest swelled softly with warmth at the thought, a feeling deeper than comfort, a quiet affirmation that some connections needed no elaboration, no dramatic declaration. For several moments they simply existed together, two beings occupying the same space with a shared awareness. Morty noticed the subtle shift in Rick's posture, the relaxed way his shoulders sloped, the gentle tilt of his head. Each small movement communicated more than words could. It was a dance of presence, a silent conversation that honored patience, reflection, and mutual understanding. Morty realized that the most profound lessons often arrived in silence, teaching him empathy, attentiveness, and the power of quiet presence. A faint hum rose from the old floorboards, a resonance that seemed almost musical in the dim light. Morty hummed softly in response, almost instinctively, a gentle echo that merged with Rick's subtle exhalations. The sound was unhurried, imperfect, and yet it carried an emotional clarity that words could never achieve. In that delicate rhythm, Morty felt the unspoken threads connecting them, threads of care, trust, and shared experience, woven quietly into the fabric of their lives. Rick finally spoke, his voice low and reflective. Morty, sometimes being here, just being, matters more than anything you could say or do. Silence isn't empty. It's full of attention, presence, and understanding. It's a gift. Morty nodded slowly, letting the words settle into the quiet around them. The gift wasn't about instruction or guidance, but about offering a steady anchor in the currents of life, a soft harbor where hearts could rest. Outside, the night deepened, stars flickering faintly through the darkened sky. Morty imagined them as silent witnesses, observing the gentle ritual of connection unfolding below. There was no hurry, no expectation, only the soft resonance of two beings acknowledging each other's presence, letting the quiet hum of attention and care fill the space between them. Each heartbeat, each breath, each shared moment of stillness reinforced the understanding that silence could be more nurturing than any spoken word. Morty reached over, letting his hand hover lightly near Rick's without touching, a small gesture of acknowledgement, a quiet thank you for the gift of presence. Rick's eyes met his for the briefest instant, a soft understanding passing between them, deeper than any conversation could carry. Morty felt the weight of the night lift slightly, replaced with a subtle, enduring warmth, the knowledge that quiet care could shape hearts as profoundly as words, if not more so. They stayed like that for a while longer, wrapped in the gentle resonance of silence, letting it flow over them, teaching without instruction, comforting without ceremony. The room, the lamp, the soft hum of life around them, all became part of the lesson that presence, attention, and care could be expressed in the quietest ways, leaving marks on the heart that endured far beyond the night. And when they finally rose to leave, Morty carried with him the soft echo of that silence, a gentle reminder that the gift of being there, fully present, quietly listening, was one of the most enduring forms of love and understanding. The room was quiet, softened by the dim glow of a single lamp. Shadows stretched long across the walls, curling around familiar shapes, dancing slowly as if reluctant to leave. Morty sat in a chair by the window, legs tucked beneath him, while Rick leaned back in his armchair, eyes half closed, tracing the faint glimmers of light that played across the room. Everything felt suspended, as though time had softened its edges to allow reflection, acceptance, and gentle breathing. Rick exhaled, a soft, measured sound, carrying both relief and contemplation. "You know, Morty," he said quietly, "sometimes life isn't about what you achieve or the adventures you chase. It's about the stretches between moments, the way you hold yourself and others gently as everything moves forward." Morty nodded, understanding the metaphor, even without explanation. Stretching wasn't about power or speed. He realized it was about flexibility, presence, and the capacity to meet the world as it comes. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves, a whispering accompaniment to the quiet in the room. Morty felt it press against the glass like a subtle reminder of impermanence, a soft nudge that nothing stayed fixed. But that was not to fear, it was simply part of the natural rhythm. Rick watched him, sensing the depth of his understanding, the way he had absorbed the lessons of countless nights like this, where silence, care, and attention held more weight than words or deeds. Rick's gaze shifted toward the ceiling, tracing the faint outlines of shadows and light. "I've made mistakes," he murmured, "plenty of them, some that sting even now. But I've also held the small things. I've stayed when I could have gone, listened when I could have ignored. That's what matters." Morty felt the weight of the words, not as guilt but as quiet acknowledgement, a final stretch of reflection that honored both failure and care, complexity and love. The fire outside, in the small fireplace, had dimmed to embers, glowing faintly in orange and gold. Morty thought of all the nights they had shared like this, humming, watching clouds, listening to whispers of wind, sharing sandwiches under starlight. Each act, no matter how small, had been a thread weaving the fabric of connection, stretching across time, fragile yet unbroken. He realized that the stretches between moments were where life's true depth lived, the space for care, for understanding, for gentle presence. Rick finally shifted, leaning forward, resting an elbow on his knee. "Morty, the last stretch isn't about endings or grand gestures. It's about acceptance, about seeing the quiet heroism in staying, in listening, in giving a piece of yourself softly and consistently." Morty felt the words resonate, folding into him like a soft echo of all they had learned together. Heroism wasn't loud. It was in patience, empathy, and the courage to remain present. Outside, the night sky stretched infinitely, dotted with stars that glimmered in their silent, steadfast way. Morty imagined their light as a reflection of these quiet moments, the stretches of care, trust, and understanding that persist beyond action, beyond words, beyond time. Each star seemed to hum softly, a lullaby that mirrored the lessons they had shared over countless nights. Rick's eyes met Morty's, and for a moment, the room held only the gentle resonance of shared understanding. "That's all right," Rick whispered, as if to himself and to Morty both. "You don't need to fix everything. You just need to be here. That's the stretch that matters." Morty smiled softly, letting the calm wash over him, feeling the continuity of care, presence, and quiet courage. The night carried on, wrapping them in its soft, embracing rhythm. Morty and Rick remained seated for some time, not speaking, just breathing in the shared calm, letting the last stretch of reflection settle around them. It was a gentle acknowledgement of life, of connection, of the small, enduring acts of care that defined the essence of their journey. And as they finally rose, the shadows softened further, the room warmed by the residual glow of embers and quiet understanding. Morty knew that these stretches, these quiet, reflective, gentle moments, would carry them forward, anchoring their hearts in patience, empathy, and love. Even as the world continued its slow, endless motion, the night was gentle, the kind that seemed to wrap the world in a soft, unbroken hush. Stars shimmered faintly, scattered like scattered whispers across the dark velvet sky. Rick and Morty sat side by side on the hill, overlooking the quiet town below, letting the night stretch around them, carrying the soft residue of their shared memories. Each breeze that drifted by felt like a sigh of the world, a reminder that even in stillness, life moves, carries, and transforms. Morty tilted his head slightly, tracing the slow dance of the clouds overhead. They drifted lazily, reshaping themselves with subtle grace, never rushing, never clinging. "They're still moving," he murmured softly, a tone of awe threading through his words. Rick nodded, the faintest of smiles tugging at the corners of his lips. "Everything drifts, Morty. Memories, regrets, joy, even people sometimes. But in that movement, there's a quiet kind of permanence, an echo of what matters most." The fireflies began to blink faintly around them, tiny pulses of golden light that added warmth to the cool night. Morty noticed how even small things could feel monumental when observed closely. The gentle sway of the grass, the distant hum of an unseen stream, the soft cadence of Rick's breathing beside him. It was in these subtle moments that the essence of life whispered its quiet lessons, reminding him that presence and care outlast even the most fleeting adventures. Rick's gaze shifted to the horizon, tracing the last hints of fading clouds. "I've left a lot behind," he said quietly, "more than I'd like to admit. But the things I stayed for, the times I chose to be present, those are what linger. They stretch beyond any moment, like light across the sky. And somewhere they wait, quietly, persistently." Morty absorbed this, feeling the weight of the words settle gently, like soft sand shifting under a slow tide. Presence, even in silence, had a way of enduring. They didn't speak for a while, letting the night hold them in its stillness. Morty imagined all the soft hums, whispered reflections, drifting sandwiches shared under starlight, and gentle guidance of past nights. They all lingered in the air, unspoken but alive, a tapestry of quiet heroism and care. The night itself seemed to embrace these echoes, carrying them as if the world were a keeper of gentle memories. Rick reached for a small notebook he had brought, leafing through pages filled with scribbles and reflections. "Sometimes I write letters I never send," he murmured. "They're for moments like this, are reminders of what mattered, what I noticed, and what I hope survives me in some small way." Morty nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. The legacy of care, empathy, and gentle presence was something that could never fully vanish. It traveled in the quiet, in the small acts, in the threads of memory that connect hearts. A soft breeze rustled the grass at their feet, carrying the faint scent of night-blooming flowers. Morty closed his eyes, letting the night wash over him, each sensation a reminder of continuity, love, and enduring connection. Rick hummed a gentle tune, one that had become familiar over years of shared reflection. Morty joined in softly, letting the sound blend with the whispers of wind and rustle of leaves. The melody was imperfect, delicate, yet perfect in its ability to mark presence, safety, and care. Rick finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Everything drifts, Morty. But what we carry, what we nurture quietly, that waits. Somewhere. Even when we're gone from a place, it waits for someone to notice again. It waits for you." Morty felt the warmth of understanding, the soft exhale of acceptance, and the reassurance that presence, care, and love could transcend time and distance. The night deepened, folding them in its embrace, stars continuing their subtle shimmer. Morty and Rick rose slowly, leaving the hill behind, carrying with them the soft lessons of the evening. That the world moves, memories drift, and yet the echoes of quiet care endure. And somewhere beyond sight and sound, waiting softly in the folds of time, was the presence of all that had been nurtured in love, reflection, and gentle attention. And with that, they walked on, letting the night carry them forward, the soft motifs of clouds, stars, whispers, and quiet presence lingering in their hearts. Somewhere in the slow unfolding of the universe, he was still there, watching, waiting, humming softly, stretching into the calm of the world. "Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's gonna be okay, man."